This is the perfect time to think about the plight of women and children who are either displaced, held hostage, or facing the consequence of a crisis they know nothing about. And joining us today on the program, Africa Today, we have BOLA or LANREWAJU of the Africa-wide Movement for Children. Welcome to the program. Actually, he is the convener of the Nigerian chapter of the movement. Thank you for joining us. On Skype, we have George Nyakora. He's the president also of Africa-wide Movement for Children, and he joins us from Nairobi, Kenya. Thank you for joining us on the program. Now, in the light of the plight of displaced children, orphan children, as a result of one conflict or the other, disease, and all of that, how much is there to celebrate this season?
Well, for some of us who are activists, I do not think the celebration is complete. I mean, considering the plight of children who are scattered around the conflict areas of Africa, like Central African Republic, Libya, Sudan and South Sudan, Nigeria here, the northeastern part of the country, so to speak. I think it is most unfortunate that these children are facing these challenges in spite of the fact that they know nothing about the problems or the causes of these conflicts, but they are made to be at the receiving end of the policies, programs, and statements they know nothing about. So, but some of us, we solidarize with them. We think about them today. And I say this with all sense of responsibility, that my Christmas is not complete because some children are not in their homes. They are not under their parents. They are not being made to grow under their family.
Now, in this state of helplessness, in this state of desperation, have African leaders done well to remember them in one way or the other, in spite of the fact that they are unable to find them as we speak, or to help them?
Yeah, I personally do not think so. I think more should be done to do something about the challenges being faced by these children across Africa, particularly the African Union. I think the African Union has not done enough. The African Committee of Experts on the Rights and Welfare of the Child, in the past 5 or 6 years, have done tremendously, to ensure that the rights of children are respected more in Africa by individual governments of Africa. But the Peace and Security Committee of the AUC, I feel, should comprise of members of the African Committee of Experts on the Rights and Welfare of the Child, so that children in conflict areas, I mean, a new agenda for children. I mean, they should draw up a new agenda for children, particularly with regard to those in conflict areas. Yes.
Now, we'll talk more about the challenges preventing the African Union and other regional bodies from doing more about the plight of displaced children and orphaned children. Now, let's go to our guest who is joining us from Nairobi via Skype. Mr. Nyakora, thank you for holding on. Now, how do you think African children have fared this year, particularly those who have been orphaned or those who are displaced by one conflict or another?
Thank you. Unfortunately, I mean, if you recall, there's been a report that has been released by UNICEF, and the report basically shows very clearly that the children of the world have not performed any better, especially in the year 2014. And let me come back to where my concern, or the Africa-wide Movement for Children concern, is on. One is on the issue of the children in Africa. Even though there's been marked improvement in terms of social protection systems being put in place, even though there's been an increase in terms of investment by African governments, But given the recent events, particularly matters related to internal conflicts within Africa, many African children continue to suffer. And I can say that African children have really fared very poorly. And as Mr. BOLA has indicated, from Central African Republic, from Chad, from Niger, from DR Congo, from Central African Republic, all the way and coming to where you're actually located in northern Nigeria. I listened to the comment by the mother about the issue that her child is still out there. And it's not just her child, there are many more children out there, and that they were not able to join their families for Christmas. So we can conclude that it has been a very sad year for the African child.
Now, Mr. Nyakora, I'd like you to take it from where our studio guest dropped it. He talked about the African Union doing very little to protect the rights of displaced children and orphaned children on the African continent. What are those factors at the regional level that is preventing the body from actualizing this objective?
I think there are a couple of things that you really need to understand. One is that within the AU, the Department of Social Affairs, where we have the African Committee of Experts on the Rights and Welfare of the Child, which is basically meant to be the watchdog of the AU in terms of the implementation of the African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child, which is basically a domestication, a continental domestication of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. There are two things. One is the fact that the committee itself, for a very long time, has been operating in isolation to all other organs within the AU system. And of particular concern is the Peace and Security Council of the AU. The AU Peace and Security Architecture, given its mandate under Article 6, which clearly defines what it's actually meant to be doing, it cannot do this without bringing together or embracing or collaborating and coordinating with the African Committee of Experts on the Rights and Welfare of the Child. The second thing is that the Committee of Experts requires additional funding. For now, from what we know as civil society and as Africa-wide Movement for Children, is that the funding that they get at the moment is not sufficient. It's not anything to go which can actually help them, given their mandate under Article 42 of the African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child. And until such a time that African governments are able to put in more funds to at least support the Committee of Experts in their work, we will continue to see violation of children's rights. And as long as we still don't have the collaboration between the various organs of the AU and the Committee of Experts who are responsible for ensuring that the African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child are actually maintained and actually looked into, and that issues that relate to an Africa being fit for children is realized, it will be a pipe dream for us.
Thank you, Mr. Nyakora, but at the risk of seeming to be holding brief for the African Union, where do you think all the funding is going to? Is it going to dealing with Ebola or the conflicts, peacekeeping operations taking place on the continent?
No, I think altogether I consider that to be misplaced priorities. You know, what we should be doing now is, you know, taking responsibility. There's nothing more important to do for the AU than to look after children in conflict areas in Africa. I know there are, you know, African Union soldiers, you know, in Somalia, in Mali, and some other areas, you know, preventing the spread of conflicts and things like that. But we are talking about children that are already affected by this conflict today. A lot of them, you know what's happening in northern Nigeria, for example. These insurgents will just go into any town and seize hundreds of children and take them away. And nobody's talking about them. I understand how difficult the situation is for the African Union. I understand, but I think something should be done urgently now. In fact, if an urgent AU meeting is summoned, I think it is not too much.
All right. We'll look at what needs to be done, how it's being done. Is it being done rightly or wrongly? But that will be after the break. We're taking a break. It's Africa Today, remember, and we have two guests. One talking to us via Skype from Nairobi, Kenya, George Nyakora, president of the Africa Movement for Children, and the convener of the group here in Nigeria, Mr. LANREWAJU. Stay with Africa Today. We'll be right back. Thank you for staying tuned to Africa Today. With most parts of the world in crisis, it is estimated that there are up to 300,000 child soldiers around the globe, most of them in countries like the Democratic Republic of Congo, Somalia, and South Sudan. I'll return to our guests now and we'll continue. Now, with this staggering number of children engaged as child soldiers, how did Africa get to this point? What are the African leaders looking the other way? What is happening?
Yeah, there's no other place in the world where you have the scenario you're having here. You can't get it anywhere else. This is the right place for such a thing to manifest. We have maladministration, bad governance that has come to stay in Africa. Conflicts after elections and things like that. And then coupled with the fact, in those days, for example, we used to have African freedom fighters. Now we have metamorphosed from that into what I call radicalization. People have come to capitalize on religion to radicalize young ones. Tell them about, use religion to radicalize them. Tell them even if you die in the process of doing this, you are going to heaven. So children are the right tools for these people, because they are too young to even determine what they are. So you just tell them to go ahead, and then they go ahead. So Africa is what it is today because of bad governance, because of irresponsible leadership on the part of African rulers. So Africa has got to this stage, and it is most unfortunate that we are allowing this to go on and on. And like I said somewhere, I said if there were hospitals for political madness, African leaders would be perennial patients.
Interesting. George, do you also share the view that maladministration, bad governance, is responsible for the level of the use of child soldiers in conflict situations?
Well, if you recall, and I think Africa is not oblivious to this fact, there was a very well-written documented report by Her Excellency Dr. Gracia Machel, which clearly indicated that the causes of conflicts today and the involvement of children in armed conflicts is an issue that is of greater concern and should concern us all. However, we need to note what she actually said then. She did make it very clear that the causes of conflicts today are as a result of a cataclysmic political upheavals and struggles for control over resources. And then in the face of widespread poverty and economic disarray, poverty, unemployment, malnutrition, lack of access to opportunities, especially for the youth then begin to start taking in the notion that with the barrel of the gun, I can be able to actually make ends meet. And I think this is how we are getting the youth getting radicalized, you know, feeling that there is no opportunities for them. And it's very easy to take an option, the easy option, and to say, I might as well take this option of going to war or joining a militant organization or joining some renegade outfit and kill my own brother and sister because there are no opportunities for me. So I totally agree with what Mr. BOLA is saying.
Now, since we're talking about conflict, there's a Kampala Convention on that produced a treaty on internally displaced persons, and that treaty takes care of prevention and resolution of the conflicts that produce the displacement. Now, that treaty has 36 African countries that have approved it and only 15 that have ratified the treaty. Now, why is it that African leaders are paying lip service to a policy document that will take care of this situation? Perhaps you want to start.
Yes. One particular thing that is working against this arrangement is the principle of non-interference in the internal affairs of each African country. It is very difficult for an African country to physically interfere in the political affairs, in the affairs of another sovereign state in Africa. And that is, for example, even though most African countries will want to give support to Nigeria or to Kenya in its fight against insurgency and things like that, it is still being viewed. I mean, you have to seek the support of the ruling government, of the state. You understand? You don't just come in. There's a limit to which you have to be invited. You have to wait to be invited. Otherwise, you will be considered to be infringing on the sovereignty of that country. And that is one thing that is working against this beautiful document.
Now, non-interference. George, the same question to you, but in a different way. Still on this policy document that has only 15 African countries out of 54 ratifying it. Perhaps some of the things militating against this document is the opposition to certain laws that the document advocates for. For instance, in Kenya, where you're talking to us from, there's an anti-terrorism law that the opposition is, at the moment, working against. Is this a challenge, you know, that is working against a document like this, in your view?
Well, let me go back to when at the start of the program, we had the British Premier David Cameron give some comments on the issues of terrorism. It is a global problem, and it therefore requires us to actually rise up to the occasion and to look at it beyond our little silos and our parochial interest, whether it's political or whatever it is. Now, I personally I'm of the opinion, and I express this on behalf of actually close ranks, and to be able to determine what is actually in the best interest of all people. I think to a large extent we can say African states have been very good at ratifying and signing off on documents. But in terms of actually domesticating it and actually implementing it, there's been a greater weakness. I want to go back to the issue again on the issue of how the various organs of the AU work together. As a continent, I think we need to try to support the African Union to review the AU peace and security architecture operational strategy in view of some of the issues that are coming. And for us to be able to understand that as a continent, we need to sign off on some form of legislation that gives the government the muscle to be able to deal decisively with militant groups that are causing havoc in our countries. And let's not shy away, under the notion of internal affairs or sovereignty of the country. But I think also at the same time, coming back to my own country, Kenya, where some of the proposed laws have been referred to as being draconian, I think the issue for me here is what is actually in the best interest of the country. And if the laws maybe is not in sync with the civil liberties of the people, there are things which can be discussed and the amendments can be made to that law, but ultimately the government, both the government of the day and the opposition, must work together to ensure that the safety of Kenyans and children in Africa is maintained. And this goes, the same thing goes for Nigeria. It is in leadership in Nigeria, whether it is the current administration that is coming to the elections in February, or the opposition that is also going to go to the ballot together with them, that they come together and close ranks and to be able to deal with the challenges in the north, especially given what the mother commented on at the beginning of this program.
George, finally, BOLA, how can, coming back home now, especially with the thoughts of the Chibok girls and many other young girls and women who have been kidnapped by insurgents, how can the Nigerian government toughen or better implement anti-terror laws?
Yeah, I think first government must exercise the political will to even deal with terrorism in Nigeria in the first place, and it should do that without necessarily politicizing the processes of doing that. Whatever comment the ruling government makes about terrorism is considered to be heavily politicized, and the blame game and things like that. Many times they say it is the opposition that is behind this. The opposition says it is this. I mean, this shows lack of seriousness on the part of our government, honestly speaking. In Africa, wherever you go in Africa, the question they ask is, how has it become so difficult for Nigeria, the giant of Africa, to deal with insurgency? I mean, that's the question they ask. They did that in Uganda. They dealt with that in Uganda. But, I mean, it's become worrisome that the giant of Africa is fast becoming the giant problem that Africa has. So I think government should wake up. It is embarrassing that the army, the Nigerian army that has, won accolades for its peacekeeping efforts in Africa, cannot deal with insurgency in Nigeria. And it's not only that, we should be more responsible. There are parents, there are children in the Northeast. Government has not shown. We understand there are foreigners among these insurgents, but I want to say that to a large extent, they are more Nigerians than outsiders.
All right. And that will be the much we can take. I want to thank you very much. I've been talking with George Nyakora and BOLA LANREWAJU of the Africa-wide Movement for Children. Many thanks for your time.
Thank you very much.
Now, with Africa set to be going around in circles for sustainable development in the midst of crisis, many say the average African child needs a hero this season to wipe their tears and end the war. Going forward, it will take a collective effort to transform weapons into plowshares, replace destruction with innovation, and save the future of the African child. That's our show for today. But don't forget to follow us and join the conversation on Twitter at TVC Africa Today. I am Bukola Samuel Wemimwan. Always remember, this is Africa. Bye for now.